Hello? Yes, now it's working. Okay, so good evening everybody, first and foremost, and thank you very much that with this rainy and cloudy day, you've been able to make it. You have come along to see us. Thank you to Fundación Telefónica again for offering us this amazing space to have an author like Tom to introduce his new book, that is Physics for Cats. But well, I think that many of you know his career as a writer, a cartoon writer for The Guardian and magazines, the New York Times, the New Yorker, sorry. And well, thank you very much, Tom, for coming along to speak about your book, to speak about the launching of this book, and you will be surprised with everything he has to tell us. And today we have Laura Barrachina. I think that many of you already know her. She's a journalist, and I have to say that she's one of the journalists that is betting the most on cartoon and comic on public radio for many years. So thank you very much for your effort. Thanks for giving credit to comic and cartoons in the cultural sphere. So thank you very much for coming along again, and I give the floor to Tom and Laura. Thank you.
Pues muchas gracias.
Well, thank you very much, Catalina. Thank you very much to you all for coming along, and thanks to Tom for allowing me to be with you once again to present your book and to spend a few minutes, a few funny minutes. The truth is that I have a presentation by Tom, but as Kata has said, I think that everybody already knows him. You've read all his cartoons, the ones that we've read, published by Salamandra, Kafka La Cocina, and long comics that are quite rare. There's something I would like to talk to him to, but you'll be surprised about what's going to happen right now. Tom, you have a surprise for us, so maybe you can go for it?
I'm going to read a few of the cartoons from the book. Actually, I'm going to take these headphones off just for this bit. I'm going to read a few of these cartoons in English, and if I think there is translation if you'd like it, and you can see them on these screens. Can everyone hear me okay? That's good? All right, okay, let's get started. So these cartoons are all from Physics for Cats, my new book of cartoons. These come from New Scientist magazine. This little guy's saying, "If that's CERN, I'm not here." A kind of classic man hiding in the bar kind of cartoon. So to explain in a kind of scientific way what I'm doing, this circle represents all the things that are science. This circle represents all the things that are cats. And the section of the diagram where they cross over is, I guess, scientists studying cats, or in a cartoon world, maybe a cat doing science. And this third circle shows all the cartoons in the book, which, as you can see, they're all about science, and a small selection of them are about both science and cats. And none of them are about cats, but not science. So that's the scientific explanation. And now we'll start with one of the cartoons with a cat. This is called Science Cat. Smash. Once again, the experiment confirmed my hypothesis, but further research in this area is required. Oh, he does more writing than I expected. I love science. And this is the original ink drawing at the top, and at the bottom is the inspiration for this cartoon and for any of the cartoons that appear in the book with a black cat in them. That's my cat, Luna. I mean, I'm being a bit unfair to Luna. She's never pushed a cup off a table. She's a naughty cat, but she hasn't done that. So I'm being slightly unfair. But, oh. My hair's not looking quite right. Okay, is that better? Okay. So, I make these cartoons for science every week for New Scientist magazine, and sometimes they're based on real science stories. And this little film shows you, this was a real scientific story where scientists invented a tiny little car and they taught rats to drive the car. And my favorite thing about this film is you can see the scientist literally jumping for joy when the rat starts driving the car. And I think if I didn't turn a story like this into a cartoon, then I'd probably get the sack. So this is the cartoon I made inspired by this story. 2019, the rat learns to drive a tiny car. 2021, the rat moves to the suburbs and commutes to the lab. 2023, Rat Car Industries is a huge success. The rat gets a chauffeur. 2025, the rat sells his rat car shares for billions. 2027, despite all his riches, the rat feels empty and alone. 2029, the rat returns to a simple life in the sewers. And since we began with a GIF, we can end up with another GIF. This cartoon was written, I think, in 2019 when Pizza Rat was a very famous meme, so I thought it was nice to have him appear. This one's called Reflection. Do you ever worry that we are living in the reflection rather than the reality? Sometimes. This one's called The Device. I created this device to test my theory that our entire reality is a simulation. But the readings I get suggest something much worse. What? We're living in a cartoon. Does it at least have a good punchline? Nope. This one's inspired by living with my teenage daughters. The first iteration of our artificial intelligence system had the brain power of a newborn baby, but it was designed to learn and grow over time. We believe that it's now functioning at the level of a teenager, but we can't be sure as it won't come out of its room. I hate you. Here's another little bit of film. There was a time when the US military released, they sort of built up releasing some amazing UFO footage. And when it actually came out, it was blurry sort of things like this, which I didn't think were terribly impressive. So I thought I'd make a cartoon about blurry UFOs. And this one's in the form of a Venn diagram. Pursued by aliens. Flying object. Hat carried off by the breeze. This one's called Maths Puzzles for Conspiracy Theorists. A train departs at 2 p.m., traveling at 40 miles an hour. The next train follows an hour later, traveling at 45 miles an hour. Why are we still using trains when the government has secret high-speed UFO technology? Susie brings 18 apples and 12 oranges to school and divides them equally between her 6 friends. How many of these children are in the pay of Big Fruit? When Tom was 8, his sister Anne was half his age. Tom is now 49. So why does Anne just laugh at him when he patiently explains to her that the earth is flat? Do you ever get the feeling that we are being observed by another life form? Do you ever get the feeling that we are being observed by another life form? Do you ever get the feeling that we are being observed by another life form? This is another real science story. Again, I can't quite remember why, but some scientists in China invented a bicycle that could travel on its own and, as this video shows, slightly sinisterly chase you around. And there's something about the fact it's in double speed makes it look slightly more terrifying. So I decided to make a story about these bicycles. Bicycle disruption. 2025. Autonomous electric bicycles are released onto the streets. They scan the pavements, offering their services to potential customers. 2035. The bicycle population gets out of control. Feral packs haunt the back streets, hijacking pedestrians and taking them on long, unwanted rides. 2045. The bicycles fuse into a colossal vortex of frame, tire, cog and chain. It traverses the globe, sweeping whole cities away on decade-long journeys. And I wrote this cartoon a few years ago, but these days London looks a bit like this in places, where the Lime bikes become these sort of unnavigatable clumps. This one's called The Abyss. I stared into the abyss. The abyss stared back. One thing led to another, and now I meet the abyss for regular chats in the coffee shop near my lab. And this is a little photograph of my sketchbook, where I always work out all my ideas in the sketchbook, and they'll begin as little doodles like this, and I'll try and work things out in there and figure out what will happen once this woman meets the abyss. This is called Soothing Sleep Soundscapes for Scientists. My daughter started listening to these recordings which help you get to sleep at night by playing you the sound of rain or a little stream running through a forest. So I invented some of my own. Grant gratitude. A calm voice reads a long letter approving your grant proposal. The sound of newly purchased equipment being unpacked plays in the background. Laboratory Lullaby. A 3-hour recording of the quietly harmonic atmosphere of a well-run laboratory, with occasional whispered compliments from contented colleagues. Peer review positivity. The editor of a prestigious journal congratulates you on every aspect of your paper, while a chorus of your rivals gently weep with envy. In conclusion, there is no single universal time. Rather, there exist an infinite number of times, each specific to a different place. Therefore, defining any exact, unambiguous points in time is impossible. Peter, I don't know why you can't just say, "Sorry, I'm late," like anybody else. Here's a picture of the cover of the English edition of the book. And here is my publisher, Megan's cat, Callie, for scale. But I've realized since meeting Callie's a very big cat. So that makes the book quite small. So I'd look at the book itself before judging the size. One last cartoon about science and cats. But I just let you out. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias Tom por este rato, por este repaso que has hecho.
Thank you very much, Tom, for this review that we've made about the spirit of this new book, Physics for Cats. And a question that I've been thinking of during the whole week: why are cats so funny?
I guess there's more cats in this book because we got a cat just after the pandemic, Luna, as we all saw, and there is something about their selfishness and charm, and they're like this slightly naughty trickster who's living in the house, and you know that you love them, but they would let you down. So I kind of respect them for that.
Oye, cuéntanos también porque...
Okay, so these are the cartoons for New Scientist. But this has to do with your family, right? It's a family tradition. It's a family magazine for you. Please tell the story about your grandpa.
My grandfather is well, he's died now, but he was a marine biologist, and he always read New Scientist magazine. And when he'd finished reading it, he'd give it to my dad. And my dad is an architect, but he's always interested in science. So he'd read it, and I'd, when I was small, just look at the pictures and the diagrams. And then I began to read it as I got older. And when I started working as an illustrator, I worked for The Guardian, I worked for the New York Times, I worked for the New Yorker. But in my family, it was working for New Scientist was the time they were like, ooh, Tom, he's done really well. Because my aunt's a scientist as well, actually. So it's sort of, it was something they respected. They respected all those other things, but it was, it really made sense to them. And so I worked for New Scientist making illustrations for a few years before we started doing the cartoons.
Eso significa...
So, does this mean that when you create these cartoons, these works, do you feel yourself with a previous scientific knowledge? I mean, what's the difference between doing a cartoon for The Guardian about literature and doing it for the scientific world? Because I think that there are many connections between both cartoons, right?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not in any way an educated scientist. I stopped studying science as a teenager in school. I'd always enjoyed it, but I just went to focus on arts and literature and things. But I've always been a fan of science. And I have, I guess because of my family, warm feelings towards scientists. So when I'd been doing my illustrations for New Scientist, and I realized they didn't have a comic strip. And so I sent a note to the editor with some of my self-published work and said, I'd love to do a cartoon for you. I didn't think they'd say yes, to be honest. And when they did, I kind of realized I don't really know that much about science. And now I have to make a cartoon for like Britain's most prestigious popular science magazine. And I imagined the scientists would be appalled at this undereducated nitwit making fun of them. But I think because I do it with warmth and with respect for their knowledge, even when I don't quite share that knowledge, they've, I think it's been well received. And I thought it would be very different making cartoons about scientists, than about writers and books and things. But there's a lot more in common than I expected, actually. I think both authors and scientists are maybe slightly obsessed with their work. It maybe makes up quite a lot of their self-esteem, so they care a lot about it. I think you probably get rivalries. They're looking for, grants in scientists and advances in publishing. You're looking to get published. So there's a lot more in common than I expected.
Y quizá también todos.
And maybe they're all trying to make history in some way, because this makes you have the opportunity of writing very funny comic strips about ambition and envies. And sometimes, for example, you find a character that is some kind of villain.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think they're all trying to make something new and to, on the positive side, make the world better, and on the negative side, become famous and rich. And yeah, I mean, I'd say they're pretty warm towards scientists, but occasionally there is a character with the classic human feelings of jealousy or ambition. And I always imagine that if you are a scientist and you read these, you can either see those things in yourself, or you can just imagine it's the colleague you hate most at work who I'm depicting.
¿Y cómo lo recibieron?
And well, I was going to ask you about scientists in general, but how was it received in your family? Any criticism in particular about how you were approaching these topics?
No, and very little from the readers of the magazine or from the wider world. I mean, the cartoons are shared on the internet, and it would be weird if there wasn't some negativity. The internet is very good at negativity. But no, generally it's very positive, and I think because I often pick a really strange theme, if you're a scientist who works in, I don't know, graphene or whatever, I think often they're just excited there's a cartoon about graphene, even if it's making them look foolish. They enjoy it. And there's a real tradition in science of, I think, enjoying cartoons, which I think it partly goes back to Gary Larson's Far Side cartoon, which was a big influence for me. He was beloved of scientists, and I think has some species named after him. So maybe one day I'll get something like that. But I think the idea of scientists cutting out a funny cartoon and pinning it on the professor's door, I think it's a sort of tradition.
Bueno, yo tengo que reconocer que le he enviado a una...
Well, I have to admit that I've said a paleontologist, if I'm not mistaken. I've sent the strip where they are at an excavation and they find a few bones. Please, you can tell us about it if you know what I'm speaking about. They find dinosaurs' bones and hen bones, right? And what happened then?
There's a mix-up, and the chicken bones for the lunchtime soup are sent to the laboratory or the museum, and they're eating a delicious pterodactyl consommé. Yeah, and that's the sort of thing where it's a very silly idea, and then when I'm presenting it, I obviously want to use the right words for the right type of science and get things wrong in the right kind of way or right in the wrong kind of way. So yeah, I like finding those interesting, correct sounding words.
Dices que es una idea muy tonta.
You say that's a very silly idea, but reality is very silly sometimes. So you've put some examples about the mice or the rat with the pizza. Sometimes, I mean, reality is crazy, right? I mean, either you're a scientist, a writer, you name it. Does reality make it difficult for you as a cartoonist?
Yeah, I think if a science story is too funny, there's nowhere else for me to take it. I think that rat one sort of sets up a story because I've been given the elements of a story, a rat and a car, and I can take that somewhere else. If the science story is too much a joke already or too funny, then I tend not to do it. I quite like taking something that's really nerdy or serious, and then there's lots of ways you can make that silly.
Yo creo que una de las cosas en común
I think that one of the things in common of all your comic strips when you approach humor is existentialism, as we've seen, for example, in that chain of observers, that in the end, well, you're almost asking us, who are we, where are we, who's looking at us, what are we doing there? In the end, there's a lot of existentialism in all your work, right?
I don't know where that comes from. It's something I need to explore with a therapist, perhaps. But yeah, I like stories that have that existentialist feel. And when I come up with a cartoon that works in that world, I enjoy that. But I couldn't tell you I think part of me, I like where cartoons which are kind of the Venn diagram of funny and sad and maybe kind of deadpan. And I think existentialism kind of has all of those things.
En el fondo eso también...
Deeply, that would entail that what you're doing is asking us, right? Maybe it's like, okay, so we laugh, we have a good time, but at the same time, you encourage us to think not only of everything that scientists or writers do, but about who we are, about what are we doing here, and to leave that question among readers, right?
Yes. I guess I leave the question because I don't have the answer, but... yeah, I mean, I like the idea that these cartoons can be, well, on a certain level, I think that there are enough bad things in the world, and if there's just one little moment of joy, that I'm happy with that. But if there's a second level, it makes somebody go on and think about things or think differently about the world of science or scientists, then that's an extra treat.
Yo te iba a preguntar qué da más juego.
I was going to ask you about what is better for you, either the literary or the scientist world, but we've already talked about that at the beginning. But anyway, the scientific world brings you towards sci-fi, brings you towards robots, for example, or superheroes. And in that case, that's very juicy, but it's very risky, right? To be dealing with the topics or to play with these topics is quite dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, often when I'm trying to think of a cartoon, I think what would be the opposite of this. So there's a couple of times I've thought, well, what's the opposite of science? And in some ways it's something like magic or witchcraft. That's like the dark twin of science. So plopping silly things like superheroes or unreal things like magic into that world is fun. And when I was doing the books, or I still am doing the book cartoons, but I'd often put science into the literary world and have a machine that made books in a scientific way. That was one of the things I did. And when I came to do these science cartoons, it wasn't intentional, but I realized I couldn't add the science because it was already in there. So I had to think, what else do I add? And it's often fantastical things or fictional. I'm kind of putting the books in. So they're almost the opposite way around sometimes.
Tengo delante una viñeta.
So I have a cartoon in front of me that could be in any field. I mean, we are thinking of this strips about science, but I think that this one has everything about our times. It is this cartoon here. I don't know if you can see it. Do you know what on any website the computer says you're a robot? Doesn't this happen to you all? Maybe you're doubtful. You say, well, and you put it here and you give the 4 options. I'm not a robot. Maybe I'm a programmed robot to believe that it's a human being. Maybe we're all robots and the robots go for power. So that's the last option. I think that this has happened to us all. Sometimes you really want to say, yeah, so I'm a robot. So maybe this strip, it could be here, but it could be anywhere else. And here you give an answer. I mean, there's a criticism, a funny criticism, but there's a criticism to this crazy world that we live in.
I think there's a bit of satire which is criticizing our world. I wouldn't say satire is the most important part of my work, but I do enjoy if I can come up with a kind of gentle satire or a thoughtful satire. I like to do that. And yeah, that's a typical one where, you have to do these weird things where you click to say you're not a robot, or you click all the boxes that don't have a horse in them or whatever. You know those pictures? It's like a picture and you have to click all the bits that are a bicycle or a crossroad. I don't know why I said horse. It's never a horse. But those sort of things, just everyday things, I think, well, how can I make them a little bit weirder to get a funny reaction?
Y luego me gusta mucho cuando...
And then I like very much when two boats converge, when we usually see Tom Gold, the literary world or cultural world. But this is quite a deal. When did this all separate, and why have we separated science from literature, from art? But I'm speaking about the strips with both universes converge, and when you bring together robots with Bergman, and there's some kind of crossover between time machines, and you see Jane Austen. So there are some intersections of your own work.
And these days, sometimes I can have an idea which is a joke idea more than it's almost a structural idea. And I think I could dress this, if I dress these characters up as scientists, I could put it in New Scientist and say they're annoyed that their machine doesn't work, or I could probably make them authors who are annoyed their latest draft is being rejected. So there's occasionally things that do absolutely cross over, and it often depends what other idea I have for the other cartoon, and then I'm like, oh well, I'll use that for New Scientist. So I'm always desperate for ideas and scribbling them down in my notebook. So anything I can find, I write down for later, and if it could work for either, that's even better.
¿Y cómo te organizas?
And how do you organize yourself after so many years? First of all, to know that joke has not been created yet, and second, that you have not made it for the literature guys. So, I mean, how do you use your brain?
In terms of not repeating myself, there's certain moments in the calendar, say the Nobel Prize is coming out, or the Booker Prize coming out, or Christmas. There's certain themes that I end up covering in my cartoons, and sometimes it can feel like, oh, I did a really good Booker cartoon last year. Like, in a perfect world, they'd almost just run it again. But obviously they're not going to do that. So it means I have to do something different. But sometimes I think that actually pushes me into doing something more weird or more unexpected. And sometimes I'm very happy that I've been forced to do something else. So when something feels too like something I've done before, I don't abandon it, but I try and figure out how to turn it upside down or stretch it or just make it different somehow. And in terms of if someone else has done it, I just don't worry about that. I think you could go mad Googling ideas for cartoon. Like the one I did with the cat being locked outside the space station. I thought somebody may well have done that. It's the sort of classic cat flap. I thought someone had done it, and I just thought, it doesn't matter. This is my version of it. And if someone has done something similar, some people on the internet, I'm sure, will tell me, but I can live with that.
Tom, el humor se...
So, Tom, do we learn humor? Do we learn how to do humor?
In terms of creating jokes, yeah, I think it's definitely something you learn through doing it. I think there's certain tricks you get used to, and certain I call them formulas, but that almost sounds like it's something you can kind of crank out. I kind of feel with my cartoons there's two halves to making them, and there's the first half, which is really hard, which is just having this spark which amuses me enough to want to make the cartoon. And I don't exactly know how that happens. I'm always hoping it'll happen. And sometimes I just get up in the morning. A few days ago, I was walking to work and I saw a pigeon, and I was thinking about the Booker Prize because The Guardian wanted a cartoon about the Booker Prize. And at that moment, I was thinking Booker Prize, I saw a pigeon. I thought, I'll write a cartoon about a pigeon who's disappointed they didn't win the Booker Prize. And I knew that the whole rest of the day would be spent working on that. But I sort of knew it would work. And that puts me into the second half, which is like being a little clockmaker who's turning it from this idea into a little machine to tell someone else the idea. And the kind of comics and humor nerd in me likes changing one word or putting that sentence after that one, or putting a blank panel for a pause. And that part I really enjoy, because it's kind of the craft of comics, whereas that magic idea can be very frustrating when it doesn't come.
Sin embargo, hemos visto una de las...
And we've seen one of the cartoons where you think about AI, and there are plenty of them about algorithms, and in fact there is a specific one about the humor algorithm with the hen that is a joke that is not very well understood. We say, well, we have to improve the humor algorithm. So have you found any Tom Gould's cartoon made with AI that someone said, please do a Tom Gould style cartoon, and they asked to ChatGPT?
Recently, a few years ago, there was a guy who was doing really weird versions where it would look like my drawing, but the speech bubble would just have that weird non-writing that ChatGPT does, where it sort of looks like writing if you half close your eyes. So it was like an abstract, humorless version of my work. So then I wasn't worried about the robots taking over. But I think maybe just in the last year, in my cartoons, I kind of feel a bit differently about AI. A lot of these cartoons were written 3 or 4 years ago, when it kind of seemed funnier and clumsier, and the idea of robots wandering around talking to people, and even the phrase AI seemed quite funny, and now it doesn't seem so funny. And in fact, I wrote a cartoon just last week where I kind of rewrote it to not use the phrase AI, because I know people have such negative feelings about it, and I have some positive and some negative. So I think it's a different thing. And I think some of the cartoons in the book probably read a little differently now than even just 4 years ago.
¿Y cuáles son tus ideas positivas?
What are your positive ideas about AI?
En tu ámbito.
In your field, I mean, because of course we know that AI for scientific procedures can be very positive. We have to say that. But what about your field?
That's the tricky part. I think the scientists making these AI are generally doing it with a positive mindset, trying to create something interesting, but they're generally tied to companies like Meta or people who are just trying to hoover up our money, really. So I haven't seen much AI work in cartoons or comics which has impressed me. I mean, I think at the moment, these AI machines are very good at copying things and making more of something that exists, or an averaged out version of everything. And that's not something I want from art. I want it to be unusual. I want it to be one person's viewpoint. I go back to Gary Larson's Far Side cartoons, 40 years after I first saw them. And it's his weird mind that I like going back to. And I'm not sure an AI, well, certainly at the moment, it doesn't seem they can do that.
No, pero por ejemplo en los...
No, but for example, newspapers, it's quite easy to think that illustrators could disappear. Maybe you just use the program. Well, this article's about this. Please create a picture about this.
And I think a sort of very cash-strapped, poor magazine might end up doing that. I would hope that the good places realize, when I get hired to do an illustration, it's as much about my ideas as my illustrations. So I think the personal style helps there, and I just hope that we don't get used to... I don't think we need to accept these less good versions of things just because they're cheaper. And the saving of that cheapness is not going to us, is it? It's going to the billionaires.
Bueno, quiero volver a tu abuelo.
Okay, so I would like to go back to your grandpa, a marine biologist, because there's a cartoon here in which we see...
Yes.
Cuéntanos la...
Please tell us about it, and maybe it's some kind of tribute to your grandpa, or maybe it's a coincidence.
It's a whale and a scientist drinking together in the bar. I can't remember exactly what the scientist's saying, but
Lo digo en español si quieres.
I'll say it in Spanish. It's oh God, Alan, you know since the very beginning that I'm a marine biologist. Don't make me choose between our friendship and the study of your eating habits and migration patterns. I don't know, I was so angry when I said this.
in that, I guess partly that's a visual joke. It's the two people sitting at the bar and turning one into a whale who fills like 75% of the cartoon. I kind of thought, well, that in itself is funny. Secondly, I like the fact the whale's called Alan. I often spend time thinking what the funniest name for an animal or a robot is, and it often is a very plain, ordinary British name. Nothing modern or cool, but something your uncle might have been called in the 1980s. So, yeah, I probably went through loads of names for that whale to find the thing that was funniest. And did I think about my I'm not sure I did, to be honest. I mean, I should do something more specific about his speciality, which was incredibly tiny crustaceans, tiny little shrimp, which he worked in Africa collecting unusual shrimp. So I maybe need to do something more specifically about his speciality.
Yo tengo la sensación también.
I have the feeling, although you've just explained how now these jokes about robots or AI maybe have different nuances, but well, your work is not, I mean, your jokes, it's very difficult that they get old-fashioned. It's some kind of timeless. Do you work on that on purpose?
I don't think I do. I think some of the visual elements are rather old-fashioned because the language of cartooning is about communicating things rather simply. So the fact that so much of our technology now is just different sized rectangles is kind of a bit boring and a bit difficult visually. So often when I draw a screen, it's like an old television because that makes it clear it's different from a phone or another thing. So I think maybe the technology is slightly stuck in the 1980s when I was a kid. But I kind of like that. And I think it, as you say, it gives things their own charm. So I don't mind too much. I don't want them to be like some fusty, completely out-of-date thing, but having a bit of a retro feel, I think, is fine.
Quiero detenerme ahora en un personaje.
I would like to stop for a minute on the professor, a character that is a professor. That these are profiles that are, well, that appear throughout all the strips, but the professor, well, her dreams. Now, for example, that she's found a mistake in her rival. There are many scientists, their big discovery is that the rival has made a mistake. So there's something very human, but there's a lot of envy. But anyway, we like them, and it's like a cartoon laugh. It's like, oh, ho, 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 like villain, you know?
I hadn't thought about this before just now, but I think there's something about calling the character the Professor sets them up for a fall, because that's a name which suggests a certain degree of respect from the people around them. It's an important job. And in a cartoon, when someone has, it's not funny if someone has respect and does things well. If they're a person who's due respect, something has to go wrong so they don't get it. Or they have to be small-minded and petty. So, yeah, sometimes the scientists are the kind of noble people who want things to go well, and yet they still go wrong. And sometimes they're like all of us, where they can be mean-spirited or cruel sometimes even. I mean, I'm just trying to make a funny world, so I'm not being kind to these characters. They have to do what I tell them, and if it goes wrong, that's tough shit for them.
Bueno, yo decía al principio, Tom, que...
I was saying at the beginning, Tom, that whoever's been at the bookshop that we had at the entry, well, now you're going to be signing there. I'm sure that people have seen your graphic novels, your long novels, but you just have quite a scarce production of this kind of novels. What happens with graphic novels or with the longer gender? Have you gotten used to the short one? And maybe, well, that's very difficult. I mean, it's very difficult to condense everything in just a comic strip. There are many pages ahead of you.
Yeah, I mean, there's something comfortable for me about working on small scale once a week and like a worker accruing 52 cartoons in a year and then a book every 4 years or so. And something about the deadline and the knowing that everyone at the newspaper will be furious if there's an empty space, so I have to fill it, which suits me, and I find that a comfortable way of working. So I think I'm quite good at doing this type of work. And I really love books like this by other people, but I also love graphic novels. And that's always a much more torturous process for me. Because I work on these ones like half the week, and I do illustration work, I don't have that much time to work on a graphic novel. So I really only want to do something I really believe in and something that's going to be really good. But that has the effect of making me procrastinate and abandon things and do all the things which you know as an artist. And when young people ask me, I just say, make pages, do it, don't think about it. But whenever I'm saying that, I know that I'm terrible for not doing that. But my next project is going to be another graphic novel, and I've got some ideas, and when I finish with the promotion of this book, I'm determined that this time I'll get it cracked.
Qué bien saber.
That's good news. And just to wrap up, because I would like the audience to take the floor, you've mentioned some of your influences. But what else could you tell us in any field, and not only in the comic field? Who would you say that are the creators, musicians, painters that have played a more important role in general? Any artists, I mean, or scientists?
I mean, the thing I probably don't say often enough about these short, funny cartoons is they're probably as much inspired by the TV comedy I was watching in the 90s with my friends in high school, and we were impersonating it when we came in to school and making each other laugh. So things like Fry and Laurie's cartoon sketches, and there's a British comedian called Armando Iannucci who's been doing series for years and years, and he did Alan Partridge, who's a kind of great British comedy character. So I think those things I was watching at that, I think maybe your sense of humor is slightly born in your mid to late teens. So those TV shows I was watching, and the friends I had around school who we all liked making each other laugh, was probably as much an inspiration for these books as anything else.
Pues si os apetece a vosotros preguntar.
Okay, so if you want to take the floor, this is your time. If you want to ask anything to Tom.
No,
You're missing a great opportunity. Come on. Yeah, here. Hello, thank you very much for giving me the possibility of participating. Well, the first thing that I knew from you was Mooncop. Well, Mooncop. Yeah. So I think it is amazing, but I'm a librarian, so she's here to take revenge. So I think it was very funny. What I wanted to ask is, well, about the content of these comic strips. They have a lot to do with literature, etc. Why did you choose that cover? Because there are not so many cover strips about librarians.
I notice that whenever first of all, I should say, when I do those literature cartoons for The Guardian, I try and not make them all be about writers or readers. I try and cycle through what I see as the different areas: publishers, writers, readers, librarians. And I noticed that whenever I did one about librarians, the internet world of librarians always took them on really warmly and positively. And I think on some level that encouraged me to make more about librarians. And it's a fun topic for me because we all have an idea of what a librarian is like. So either I can play along partly with those cliches and have fun with them, or I can completely turn it on its head and do something else. And I like the fact that whenever I did it, librarians seemed to like it so much. And then it's always difficult to come up with a title because the content of the book is almost a random selection of things. But there was one cartoon which mentioned Revenge of the Librarians, and just as a sentence I thought that sounds cool, and I also thought, oh, the librarians are going to love this. so that was good. And with this one, when I told my publisher that maybe one of the cat cartoons, she was like, people love cat books. So she was delighted. So yeah, it's in a way, it's just picking something which sounds fun and doesn't mislead, but just kind of captures people's attention.
¿No hay ningún científico?
No scientist in the room? Oh, sorry. Oh, we'll go there in a minute. So, how can you have imagination enough to write all the jokes, all the comic strips?
That's a good question. And sometimes I think maybe I will run out of funny things to say about books or about science. And maybe at that point I'll have to try and write cartoons about music or architecture or, something else. But at the moment, I still seem to be able to come up with something. And I think, as I was saying before, it's partly just knowing I have to do it. Knowing the deadline's coming helps me get on with it. And I guess I'm just always seeing new things happening in the world and watching a film or having a conversation with something, and something clicks. And now I've got this slightly Terminator-like red dot that I'm like, this will make a cartoon, this will make a cartoon. So I spot those things and I note them down, and I have enough sketchbooks with unused ideas that on a week when I really can't think of anything new, I look through the old books and think, oh, I didn't use that. I'll polish that one up. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Creo que teníamos por aquí.
I think we had another one here. Hello. One thing that I like a lot about your cartoons is the space and the constructions. In fact, we can see that on the cover. And I would like to know how you think about it, because we have the character, we have the background, but I have the feeling that your backgrounds are not backgrounds. It's a little bit more than that. Maybe your father was an architect?
Of it is from when I was small. I saw my dad sitting at his drawing desk with his special rotring pens that I wasn't allowed to use because they were too delicate. So I was always very jealous of those. And I'd see him drawing a building and think, oh, that looks amazing. And then one day I'd be in his car and we'd have to stop at a building site and he'd have to have an argument with a builder about something that was wrong. And I think, oh, I don't want any of that. So I think I took the part of his work that looked like fun and made that into my work. And I think maybe that is partly why, they are quite simplistic and modular, my cartoons. And in terms of backgrounds and construction and things, I suppose first of all I'm thinking of the overall construction of the strip itself and how your eye can be drawn across the page in an interesting way or in a way which presents you the punchline just at the right moment. So I am sort of drawing a plan of where I want you to look. And sometimes you need absolutely no backgrounds, there isn't space, and they would be diverting from the point of the joke. And then there's other times like the ISS, the International Space Station with the cat, where all those details on the space station help sell the idea that it's the space station. But I think they also maybe make you think, oh, it's going to be really complicated for him to open the door to let the cat back in. So that has some subconscious, adds something very slight to the joke. And I'm always trying to figure out with the colors, the details, the structures, how those can help the joke work as well as possible.
Pues
Okay, so I think that last question. Okay, last question.
Okay, I was wondering if you have ever met Randall Munroe from XKCD, because he makes, it's a different space, but it's about science.
No, I haven't actually. I like his work. Some of it goes completely over my head. I love the fact that the internet, I think, has given him this space where he can make stuff which is, I'd say, much nerdier, much deeper than my work in its science, the level of science that's in there. But it's great that it can find the people who get that stuff. And that's the great thing about the internet. For all the bad things about social media, the fact that work that's a little bit odd can find its own audience, even if that's a small percentage of everyone, that's a great thing. And, you know, I think it's probably my stuff being shared online, which has meant I could come here and do this. So I'm very positive about that. And I when I do understand his work, I really enjoy it.
Pues bueno, muchas gracias.
Okay, so thank you very much. I think that we will say goodbye, but now you can go to have a signature with this cartoon. Sorry, it's the end of the book, but it's very beautiful because it says, and then as it got there, the masked botanic disappeared and just left a much deeper knowledge of flora and fungus of the area. So we'll say thank you very much for coming along.
Thank you.
Thank you.